He truly is a genius. The guy is too smart for his own good. You can just tell when you're talking to him. He's got a million thoughts going through his head, and he's already, 10 steps ahead of you in the conversation. And then you'll see he has to wind it back. Okay, what were we talking about? What were we talking about? I was over here. But just absolute genius. Probably I have the closest relationship with him out of anybody on our staff because I work so closely with him. He's literally our run game coordinator. And the fact that I do play so many different positions, like at times he's my position coach. Because if it's not something that a normal running back or fullback would do, I have to go to him and he'll give me the coaching details on it. I mean, guy was at my wedding, so super close with him. Just literally, I can't say enough good things about the guy. He's an absolute beast, stud.
You just saw what Kyle Juszczyk told us on our podcast, which you can find below in the description.
Yep. Also, that's Guy, John. You guys know the deal. Subscribe to the page, like the video. Leave your comments. We see those.
All right, so what you just heard was what Kyle Juszczyk said about Mike McDaniel, Niners offensive coordinator, previous 4 years the run game coordinator. And you hear something like that, it sounds a lot like the things people were saying about Kyle Shanahan before he became a head coach, calling him things like a genius.
Yeah. I'd say geniuses keep other geniuses close, right? I mean, typically when you look at some of the great offensive coaching staffs, right, some of those 80s Bill Walsh squads, Mike Holmgren was one of Bill Walsh's guys. Then when Seifert took over, what'd they have? They had Mike Shanahan. And then eventually it just kind of, once Holmgren, it was like Gruden, Andy, Mariucci. Now the Shanahan, it kind of feels like the McVay, the LaFleurs, the McDaniels. How could you not, when you're a coach, I think a lot of jobs you kind of go and do your own thing, right? Like if me and you run a sales company, eventually you just got to go kind of sell on your own. Like in football, you don't really, it's all together, right? You game plan together, you're on the field together. Maybe a meeting room, you have a unit for a small period of time, but it is kind of like if Kyle's the leader of the group, everyone kind of follows his lead. And then everything you're saying, once he gives you the mic, whether you're McVay back in the day or now McDaniels and LaFleur, he's empowering you to talk, and anything that he disagrees with, he's going to have feedback right away. Like it's kind of just a group meeting 24/7, 365, right?
Yeah, it does make
it is unique that way as a profession.
It does really make me wonder. LaFleur's gone. Okay, Shanahan is still the reason, right? He is the core of the whole thing. He's the middle of the spoke. But it makes me wonder it might be difficult, and this is why you ideally would like to promote from within. So the guy that replaces Mike McDaniel maybe one day, if he leaves and becomes a head coach in a year or two or three, whatever, that Kyle doesn't have to reteach because Mike McDaniel maybe has taught. I think for what you and I do, we benefit a lot from the fact that we don't spend a lot of time trying to explain to each other this is what I'm trying to get out of this. And I think that's efficient, but it's also how you get to I think your highest production levels. And one thing I think about specifically with Juszczyk, where like Juszczyk's words are valuable here, is we always talk about trying to put a round peg in a square hole. But Juszczyk's like a triangle peg, right? You heard him saying in that clip, like sometimes I'm dealing with run game stuff, sometimes I'm dealing with pass game stuff, sometimes I've got to deal with multiple coaches because there's no other peg that's like him, right? That's why they called him an OW. And so that's a unique player to work with. And obviously, I think the fact that Mike McDaniel worked with him in the way he did, it's a reflection of Kyle that he worked with multiple coaching rooms, so to speak. But I also think it's a reflection of the coaching staff that they work with a player like him really well.
I think the thing LaFleur and McDaniel had, kind of like McVay and the older McDaniel, or the older LaFleur, you get a lot of these little 5'10" white guys, is that they had been with Kyle for a long time. One guy that I think is going to benefit directly moving forward now that one of them is gone, and McDaniel, like Kyle's always had a couple guys doing it, right? In Washington, it was LaFleur and Sean McVay played a role. Now these last really 4 years, it had been McDaniel and LaFleur were kind of his little right-hand minions. Well, what about Wes Welker?
Yeah.
Won't Wes kind of become a guy now that's going to be viewed in a couple years like, wait, this guy learned to play under Belichick, was around Brady and Manning, and then learned coaching under Kyle and some of these other guys, like it's a think tank. I say it all the time. If you're a young coach, like a young offensive coach, I would be emailing Kyle Shanahan 24/7, 365 to get in, right? To just be a camp intern or something, just because clearly it's now proven over a decade that the rate these guys are going. Like I don't see any way that McDaniel probably is an offensive coordinator next year if the Niners have a good year this year, right? I mean, like legitimate teams like make him for a defensive head coach the offensive coordinator, like LaFleur became this year.
Yeah. It's a good point.
Or does Kyle ever eventually kind of pivot to the, kind of enable those guys to call some plays too? It's a hard spot to be in.
It feels like it's,
Yeah.
Kyle,
like would Tiger Woods let someone else hit his shot? Probably not.
It's like that's his pitch. Now, to Juszczyk's point, what he told us in some other parts of the interview, that Kyle is not just that, right? He's not just an offensive wizard that sits in the corner, doesn't know how to handle a locker room. In fact, what they learned about him first was that he's a really good leader. But I also think it's a reflection of, we make fun of a McVay guy. If you're just around McVay, well, it's like, yeah, if you're around McVay, you get to learn from McVay. That's not nothing. Just like who your professor was in a particular class, if you're a lawyer, that matters. Maybe you get a better internship with a judge because of who your law professor was. Well, because the judge is thinking, well, this person learned from somebody who's really good at what they do. So we make fun of it, and I've got no problem making fun of it because I do think we're going to have to wait and see over a 5 or 6 or 7 year span, like how many of these guys really are really good coaches, could take what Sean gave them. But we didn't make fun of it when it was Belichick's guys getting jobs, right? All Belichick's guys were getting
I actually
jobs.
think the Sean McVay people making fun of him has actually aged pretty well of that. Like the Kingsbury thing was like they were friends. The other guy, if you worked for him, this is the knock on Belichick, right? Is that he did not really teach his people. He kept a lot of the secret sauce. And I saw the opposite, like Andy Reid would have staff, like he's the guy implementing the offense. He leads the install. And maybe there are just elements of Belichick. I don't know. I've never been there. And this is where I think football, like if I worked at Netflix, I'd be like, yeah, I worked for Reed Hastings, even though maybe I saw the guy once in a year. If you are on the coaching staff, and this is fair for Belichick too, and you are on, let's say, if I'm on Sean Payton's coaching staff, because I've seen this a lot with like guys said that an intern for the Saints or been a quality control guy like Joe Brady, you are in the meeting every day with Sean Payton. Like that is, no one argues that, right? And I think in other industries, you're like, okay, was he really around this? Well, if you were an offensive coach on on the 80s 49ers, like you saw Bill Walsh every day and you interacted with him. Like that, no one argues that in football. It kind of jumped the shark, it felt like, the last couple of years with the coaching. But it does make sense. Like if you work for Sean McVay for 5 years, you were around him every day, right? Or Kyle or whoever.
Right. And Mike McDaniel hasn't worked for Kyle for a year, to your point. It's been a long. I mean, how many years has he been with Kyle? I mean, he's
like
been
almost a decade.
14 years.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying. I think, could Wes jump McDaniel or be paired with McDaniel? Like I think he can stand to benefit a lot now because I think McDaniel's really going to shine. Because before it was like the two guys split it, like LaFleur and McDaniel. Now McDaniel is viewed as like the true right-hand man. But we like names. Like I do think I could see something build up with Wes. He's a really famous player, and all of a sudden these guys start hyping him up.
Yeah,
maybe Kyle goes from having 3 or 4 guys that we start talking about.
But at the end of the day, we go back to what Juszczyk said. It'll happen with Wes if Wes is as good as these other guys at it.
Yeah,
right? It won't happen with Wes just because he's a. It turns out we'll see. We got to see Mike LaFleur with the Jets. We got to see it play out. But the way that he's talking about Mike LaFleur, the way that he's talking about Mike McDaniel, they'll talk about Wes that way internally, and then when they talk to other people, if it's the same way they all talked, the same way guys were talking about Kyle, just telling guy, was it Levine Toilolo that had that, or no, it was what's his name, the other tight end.
It was Hooper.
It was Hooper who was like, he would just tell us to be so, and he'd be right, exactly what he said was going to happen would happen, and then we talked to. And then Toilolo said something like that, I think. And then we talked to Kittle about it, and Kittle said that it started stacking up.
The Niners have a scout named Steve Slolik, I think, and his brother Bobby was like the quality control guy on offense last year. They bumped him up, and he's probably 30. And he's just going to be on this path as these guys leave to just kind of work your way up. And this is where I think Kyle. And Andy's done a good job of this for a long time. When you can get guys young whether it be a coach that is not an NFL player, right, in their 20s, and when you can get NFL former players right when they finish playing, right, that are ambitious about and put them right in the quality control route. Andy's done a good job of that over the years with the Nagys and the Mike Kafkas. Kyle, I think Wes is kind of his first guy because before he's just taken these like little up-and-comers that were ready to start coaching it because they weren't going to be NFL players. And if he can keep doing that, that's how you keep it rolling. Because those guys, and Belichick does the best job of it for the last 20 years. He gets these guys at nothing and creates them.
Imagine how efficient DeMeco Ryans was at watching film his first year as an assistant coach when he just turned on the film and he was playing. He knew everybody's tendencies on the film because he had just been playing football, right? A year or two prior.
Yeah.
I mean, I would imagine it's just the most efficient way to watch film is when you already know everybody on the field.
Probably been a pretty smooth transition.
Your learning curve is just so much shorter.
Big time. When you've played players and like you legitimately know game plans with strengths and weaknesses.
Yes, it's right? Like, bam, let's hit the ground running.
Yeah, that to me is like when you don't need any. I don't blame a player that takes a couple years off and realizes he missed it. When you did not, like, you just hit the ground running, he is.
Vrabel.
And even he it felt like it took a couple years and then coached at Ohio State. Like, DeMeco just, boom, right to the league. But Vrabel became a head coach pretty fast.
Yeah.
You could argue that DeMeco, if this goes well, head coach in 2 years?
At this point, I don't think you can, I mean.
Put a year on it?
No. What I was going to say is I think it's impossible to really make that prediction. But I think what you're saying I do agree with in the sense that if you're immediately impactful, it can happen that fast.
Brian Flores, remember, 1 year. Patricia gets the job. They win the Super Bowl, gets a job. 1 year later, he was the defensive coordinator. Their defense was way better because, remember, they kicked the Rams' ass in the Super Bowl, but that defense was really good. He became a head coach.
Do you think that happens if that whole situation doesn't occur with the Patriots?
Yeah, it's unique. They were in the peak of their dynasty, but I'm just saying, like, you do see guys now on prominent teams that just LaFleur was only a coordinator for 1 year before the Packers took him. DeMeco, that guy had been coaching longer, right? He had been with the Texans since like 2008 or whenever when Kyle originally hired him. I just think the cycle now is probably unfair to put timelines on any human.
Well, it is
right?
unfair, but so here's the
who's more of a lock to get a head coaching job next year, Joe Brady or LaFleur with the Jets? I don't think anyone has the advantage there.
No, I'm with you. I think if I were to re-answer the question you asked, it's unfair to put a timeline on somebody, but at this point, you cannot say. It's also unfair to put the restriction on them to say, well, it's probably going to take a couple of years because right now it doesn't. Look at Brandon Staley; it just took him 1 year. So unless you can do quicker than 1 year, I can't say no. DeMeco Ryans can't be a head coach in 1 year
because if they have a top 5 defense and it's like he's been around the league way longer, team captain, beloved in the league, like he actually checks more boxes than Brandon Staley, right? If he just has one great year, especially with Vrabel's success, maybe Vrabel helps out defensive guys.
It's like the Rams won the Super Bowl.
Yeah, which would be good for Kyle. I guess McDaniels can always become a true offensive coordinator where he's calling plays. They can't block that anymore, which he did, remember, a couple years ago with LaFleur's brother.
Yeah.
I wonder if in the next 5 years it'll be a thing that, like, there won't really be like, if you're getting a raise, you're gone. Something like that. Who knows? But there's not, like, a true coaching union. Kyle got pretty lucky. Like, for the first 4 years, they had the same staff.
Yep.
And even now, it's like not really that much. Like, he did keep in-house guys to take over the roles. I bet he feels pretty good about it, right? Yeah. But that's not always going to be the case unless you just have an unreal pipeline. Like, Belichick's probably the best. Even Andy a couple times. Now, like Spagnuolo, he just went back to the well of a guy that he hired way back in the day. So,
right.
Eventually maybe you get to that role, like maybe in like 5 years, Robert Saleh's back as a defensive coordinator.
Because the Jets.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's true. Is Doug Peterson on the staff yet?
No, but see, like, Kyle shouldn't be opposed to doing stuff like that, right?
No. I know you're a good coordinator, what do I care what your win-loss record as a head coach was?
Yeah. And I think guys are going to want to get involved, right, to get their
Hell yeah.
status back.
Hell yeah.